Did The Simpsons predict the 2020 election? Now that we know that Biden has won the presidency, we have to take a better look into this statement and if it's really true. Now, let's get straight into the video and talk about if The Simpsons did really predict it and how close they got to predicting it if they failed to. In a Simpsons episode, Mr. Burns endorses Mitt Romney in the 2012 election against Barack Obama. Burns walked over to a map of the US showing red and blue states and how they voted for the election, which fans noticed was almost the same as the current electoral map with Trump and Biden. Many suggested The Simpsons had done it again, as one wrote, "The Simpsons really do predict everything." Others were amazed that seemingly the show had only managed to get Arizona wrong, which Biden won. In the background, they however also predicted Ohio wrong, as they predicted it would go blue even though it ultimately went red instead. But other than that, they correctly predicted the Midwest, Northwest, Southwest, Northeast, among many others. And although they did not predict that it would be Biden versus Trump, it was still blue and red, which of course means Democrat and Republican, the two main parties in the US, and Trump is Republican while Biden is Democrat. However, in another episode where they talk about the election, Trump actually ends up winning, and as we know, that did not happen. In this episode, they also hint on another thing that has become huge throughout this election, which is that every vote counts. And as we've seen in several states, there have been some pretty close winners in places such as Georgia and Arizona. But The Simpsons have also seemed to guess what will happen after the election and all the crazy things that will go on. In an episode that actually just came out about a week ago, on October 31st, 2020, which is Halloween, there was a special Simpsons episode that went over this year's election and how Homer could not decide who to vote for. But then the episode cuts to Inauguration Day, but it was not a normal one at all, as we see Homer armed on top of a roof with a gun, while Springfield was lying in ruins just below him. Robots roamed the streets and 4 skeleton horsemen flew through the sky, each holding a banner, one saying famine, another pestilence, and a third which said war. Now, I guess that this is what everyone is hoping will not happen, as this has been one of the most tense elections of all time, with both sides really hating each other. So as long as what happens in The Simpsons doesn't happen, it'll most definitely be a very good thing, as no one wants to see a war break out or something crazy, especially with how bad 2020 has been so far. Now, earlier we talked about how The Simpsons were wrong for choosing Trump, but who knows, maybe they weren't talking about the 2020 election, but instead the election that went down in 2016, one that Trump did in fact end up winning. Now, this is a very real possibility, but the fact that we don't hear much from the creators of the show as we may want, we will most likely never get an answer to that question. Now that we've gotten the main point of the video out of the way, let's dive into some other things that The Simpsons have predicted that have happened in 2020 already, just to stay near the same subject. The coronavirus has been a major part of this year, but not only have The Simpsons predicted the coronavirus, the show has also created a prediction that said a celebrity would get it, but then the celebrity actually got it. But first, let's talk about the coronavirus itself. We all know about the virus, deadly if you're vulnerable, but not too deadly if not old or sick. But The Simpsons seem to predict this virus, although it was called the Osaka flu instead of the coronavirus. We see this flu first spread through factories and their workers. The way that this was actually spread in this particular episode, called Marge with Chains, was when a worker coughed into a package, which was then sent over to Springfield, leaving worrying citizens everywhere fearing for their lives. And of course, everyone wanted to find a way to get themselves immune, which of course caused some chaos. But this part is quite interesting. Tom Hanks was actually predicted to get this virus in an episode. And if you know much about Tom Hanks, you may know that he actually got it in Australia in the early stages when he was shooting one of his new movies. However, luckily, he was able to recover well, so it is pretty crazy that The Simpsons was able to predict this particular piece of information that seems so out of the ordinary and random. Now, The Simpsons, as we talked about earlier, also predicted that crazy amounts of civil unrest would come into play. However, that has already happened both in this year and in a Simpsons episode from years ago. In fact, in the same episode that talked about the coronavirus. Now, this could very well tie into the election, and as we saw in real life that stores were boarding up their walls and the National Guard and police all over the place were getting ready for some rioting to possibly happen, and it has not happened yet. Now, let's get into more of President Trump and what led to the Simpsons writers thinking that he could have been elected, whether or not they meant it in 2020 or 2016. Al Jean, a writer for The Simpsons from day one, said, "We were looking for a funny celebrity who would be president, and that is what they did, even though many people think that he's just avoiding the main subject." But The Simpsons writers, as we said earlier, are not very transparent with their prediction statements. Now, there were many reasons why people may have not wanted Trump to have a second term. But even though many people overlook things, they may have been thinking about the World War III stuff that happened earlier on this year, and maybe they thought that Biden would do a better job with it. But first, let's go on a rundown on what happened earlier this year. Trump attacked and killed General Soleimani in the Middle East after he had posed threats, and although many liked this move, some still did not. But now let's go into what the predictions were in The Simpsons, whether or not they were even correct in the first place. In this episode, we see that Lisa has gotten engaged to an Englishman whose name is Hugh, and Homer ends up taking Hugh to Moe's bar. And if you've seen the show before, you most definitely have heard of this bar. But while they were at the bar, Moe begins to talk about World War II and how America was a major savior to Britain once they entered the war. That is, after he finds out that Hugh is from England. But then Hugh ends up responding with these words, "Yeah, well, we saved you in World War III. Now, although The Simpsons did not quite get this prediction right, they were indeed pretty darn close. However, we're quite lucky that this never really happened in real life, as it would have just made this year worse and worse, as people would have been under more stress." Now, the last thing that we'll talk about in today's video is all the advancements that have helped America over the past few years, but especially on the technological side of things. And this has also helped more and more people vote for the next president. The first thing is FaceTime and other versions of things similar to FaceTime that have really emerged in 2020 because of the coronavirus and the need for schools to go online and use technology, using things such as Zoom and Google Meet. In the episode that predicted World War III possibly being a thing, we also saw FaceTime, where on top of a phone while Lisa was calling Marge, they could see each other, which was a pretty crazy thought at the time. But now, and especially in this year, it has emerged as a bigger and bigger thing. Virtual reality has been around for years, but as always, it's always growing and growing, getting easier to use, cheaper so that more people can use it, and just better overall. In that episode, we saw them go into Moe's bar to use it, and for the people who watched the episode, it was a pretty crazy thing to see. But if it were an episode that would come out tomorrow, it would not seem pretty crazy, which just shows us how much the world has changed in this aspect. Now, all of a sudden, more and more people are being reached out to, and more people are becoming educated about our country, and learning about things such as presidential candidates and whether to choose one candidate over the other one based on their own views and how each of the candidates will work to fulfill them. But even with these good advancements, there are still some bad, but for the sake of this video, we're still thankful for all of these advancements in technology. And if you think about it, because of these advancements, we can make videos for all of our viewers as well. Thanks for watching this video of Caught on Camera. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications to get alerted when we post next, and comment your thoughts. It would be greatly appreciated.